I moved out of my parents' place when I was 22 because rent was cheaper with strangers and because it felt like the right kind of reckless independence. I thought I knew what to expect: split bills, shared chores that never got done, the occasional late-night friend crashing on the couch. What I didn't expect was how small, ordinary things, an unlocked door, a shadow in the hallway, a soft scraping at 3 in the morning, could carve a permanent line through the way I trusted a place where I slept. If you like these kinds of stories, stick around until the end. Hit subscribe and tap like if you want more real roommate horror. Now, here are 3 times my living situation stopped being college chaos and started feeling like something I should have left weeks earlier. The house on Elm had thin walls and a porch light that never seemed to work properly. I signed the lease with 3 other people: KJ, who worked nights at a warehouse and came home smelling of diesel and coffee; Mara, a quiet grad student who studied plants and kept glass jars lined up on the kitchen shelf; and me, an accountant in training who thought a spreadsheet could fix any domestic problem. At first it was ordinary. KJ's nights made him a ghost during the day. He'd sleep through the afternoon and stagger in at dawn, yawning and apologetic about the mess of his shifts. He paid on time. He didn't rent out the living room for parties. There was a baseline of weird that I accepted. People are messy when they're 20-something and sleep-deprived. The first odd thing was small enough to laugh off. I woke up one Saturday to the sound of KJ's truck idling in the driveway when he wasn't supposed to be home until noon. Someone had left the kitchen light on. There was a coffee cup in the sink. I thought maybe he had to unload an overnight delivery, or he'd been too tired and came back. I texted him, "Are you okay?" No reply. I banged around the kitchen and found his truck empty. No sign of him, no keys on the counter. The back door, the one that stuck in the rain, was latched but not locked. I called his phone. Voicemail. I shrugged it off. He'd been late before. He'd probably fallen asleep at a buddy's place. The second odd thing came 3 nights later. I woke up at 2-something because the house sounded wrong. Too quiet, but with the radiator coughing like someone moving through vents. I lay there, the moon feathering light across the ceiling, and heard the creak. The hallway floorboard that creaked on the way to the back bedroom. Not KJ's route, different footfall. I sat up, heart kicking, and listened. The creak again, slower this time, the sound of deliberate stepping, someone moving with care. Then a muffled click, like a latch being testing. I moved with grand metaphors in my head and a lot less courage in my body. I slid out of bed in the dark, the wood cold under my feet. The hall smelled like someone had been in the kitchen. Burnt toast, the metallic tang of old coffee. I pictured KJ, apologetic and sheepish, or maybe Mara, her hair loose, fidgeting with a plant jar. The door to the living room was cracked enough that the hallway light made a thin slice across the couch. There, at the edge of that slice, a hand rested on the back of the couch, long fingers, knuckles pale. A silhouette hunched in the kitchen doorway, and for a second, everything in me thought it was KJ. I said his name, voice a husk. The figure didn't move. The hand pulled away slowly, like it had been startled awake. The silhouette turned and stepped into the kitchen light, and I saw a face that I had never seen in this house before. A man in his 30s, bulky jacket hanging off him, beard patchy and salt-streaked, eyes squinting at me like streetlights. He had a flashlight, but it was off. He looked more bewildered than aggressive, as if he'd expected someone else to be there. "What are you doing in my house?" I asked, all the questions I should have had earlier. "Who are you? Who let you in?" collapsed into those 4 words. He blinked. He said, "Is KJ here?" in a voice that didn't suit the bulk of him, like it belonged to someone who spent a lot of time yelling into walkie-talkies. I kept my voice flat and said, "No, he works nights. Who are you?" He hesitated and said, He said I could leave some stuff. We were supposed to meet. I thought he was home." The way he said it sounded rehearsed. His hands twitched. He stepped toward the hallway, and the light made his shadow long on the floorboards. He had a duffel slung over his shoulder, and when he moved, a small clink came from it. Metal, maybe tools. I walked backwards, putting distance between me and him without making a run for it, because running makes you look guilty. He kept watching me with that blink squint, as if trying to tally what I was worth. I told him to leave. He nodded like someone taking directions and walked out, careful not to breathe too loud on the boards. I watched him to the back door until the porch light caught him and his shadow left the doorway. By morning, there was mud on the welcome mat and a dried smear on the threshold. KJ texted around noon. "Sorry, wrecked at work. Didn't mean to freak anyone out. Who was in there?" I told him. His replies were short. "Not me. I did not tell anyone to drop off anything." When I asked whether he'd met the guy before, he said no, that he didn't owe him anything. We called the landlord, who took down the description, and said he'd check the security footage from the small camera over the alley. The footage was useless, grainy black and white, the angle missing the porch. The landlord shrugged and told us to lock doors. We changed the locks that week because the landlord dragged his feet. KJ said he couldn't have possibly given someone our key, that he kept his under the seat of his truck.
Mara, with a steady voice, insisted on making a list of who had keys. We joked thinly. The man in the jacket became a strange guest story we told each other to puncture the fear with laughter. But nights grew smaller. I started carrying my phone by the bedside lamp. I checked the locks each time I got up. If I heard a creak, I froze, breath held, translating every household sound into the possibility of someone else standing at the threshold. 2 months later, Mara found a different kind of evidence. She'd been up late with a plant that wouldn't unbend its leaves and went into the living room for a glass of water. There, on the couch arm where I often left my wallet, was a small brass key. It wasn't ours. It had a tag with a parking lot number scribbled in black ink. I picked it up with a paper towel, palms sweaty, and felt the ridges of the teeth like a promise. KJ swore he didn't recognize it. It wasn't until the landlord mentioned someone had been seen snooping around an empty storage shed behind the property that we let the possibility sink in. Someone had been in our house before, and maybe he'd come back, or maybe he had left something behind. We moved out 6 weeks after that. It wasn't cinematic, no chase, no dramatic door slamming. It was boxes and a shared car, and the landlord's shrug when I asked if he could change the deadbolt now. He told us the lease had to run its term. We left with a quiet sense of violation that folded into the way I walked into new apartments. Keys in hand, a flashlight by the bed, locks tested 3 times in a row. There was no hero moment, only the slow, steady realization that the ground you sleep on can shift without you noticing. A few years later, I was renting a room in a duplex with Jason, a guy from my office who could fix anything with duct tape and a YouTube tutorial. He was the kind of friend you could trust with the spare key and the spare move. Competent, tidy, the kind of person who brought plants back from Home Depot and named them after bands. The neighborhood was quieter than Elm had been, lined with maples and the smell of someone barbecuing on Sundays. We split rent like clockwork and bickered about dishes with the lazy affection of people who knew they'd be stuck together for one more lease.
Jason kept a small safe in his closet. He didn't brag about it, he just had it under a blanket, where he kept a camera he'd used for freelance gigs and a stack of hard-to-replace negatives. One Thursday, he came home early, hair wet, hoodie zipped up, and said, "I think someone was in here." He had that way of saying things that meant either he was joking or he was trying not to show something. He told me he'd left to pick up a client and come back to find the closet door ajar. The safe popped open. He said only small things were missing, an SD card, a notebook, but he got the impression someone had been rummaging for something else. We called the police.
The officer was patient and polite, and wrote down the serial numbers and told us to lock up. He suggested neighbors check security footage if they had any. Jason swore he'd been careful with his key. He asked if I had seen anyone hanging around the driveway. I said no, though now I started to remember a bearded man threading our street 2 weeks earlier, hands jammed in a denim jacket, eyes like a flat coin scanning porches. I couldn't say whether it was the same person. That night, we made coffee and sat on the couch and tried not to be too loud, which is hard when the two of you have the nervous energy of men who refuse to acknowledge how scared they are. We talked about whether to put a camera on the porch, whether to tell our boss about the break-in. Then, at about 1 in the morning, Jason woke me up to the sound of someone walking in the hallway outside his room. At first, it was just the soft pad of socks, then a scrape like a chair being moved, then a breath caught in a throat. Jason's door cracked open, and he called out, "Who is it?" in a voice that was both steady and small. The footsteps stopped. Then, faintly, a voice that had a hitch to it answered, "I thought Jason was home." The hallway light had been left on. It painted a narrow column of orange across the floor. As Jason opened his door, the beam of a flashlight passed the threshold at the end of the hall, aimed up the stairs. Jason's face went white in the light. He moved like a man whose instincts had been given a script. Shut the door, turn the lock, call me. I heard the click of a deadbolt on the neighboring door. I crept to the top of the stairs and squinted. At the bottom of the stairs, a figure stood in the kitchen threshold, a man with a thick beard that made his mouth look smaller. He was lean, like a stringed instrument, and he held a flashlight in a way that made me think he knew how to use it without giving himself away. He wasn't wearing the jacket of a delivery man or the reflective vest. He looked like someone who had walked to our house because he could. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He waited, shoulders hunched, watching the front door as if he expected it to open and someone to come out. When he saw me at the top of the stairs, he tilted his head, the expression of someone recognizing a face without the courtesy of greeting. "Is Jason here?" he asked again, as if our silence confirmed his expectation. Jason's voice came from behind closed wood. "No, he's sleeping. Who are you?" The man took one step forward and then another, each footfall measured. He said, "I used to rent this house. I left something in his room earlier." He said it like a fact, a detail from a ledger. He didn't seem to notice, or didn't care, that we were shrinking around him. I called out, "You need to leave." It sounded thin. He tipped his flashlight beam up, and for a second the light caught the glint of something metal tucked into his jacket. Maybe a wrench, maybe nothing. I couldn't tell. He started to open his mouth, and then the sound of a siren, distant and wavering, cut through the air. It could have been a coincidence. It could have been anything. The man flinched as if someone else had said his name, and then he turned and walked out the front door to the porch and beyond. The porch light flickered on as he passed beneath it. In his hand, he kept the flashlight off. We called the police again. They came and took a report and told us they'd patrol the area.
They did, in the sense that an officer parked down the street for a night shift and then wasn't there when we woke. We didn't sleep well for days. Jason took to keeping a pair of work gloves and a spare key in his pocket at all hours, like armor. We installed a cheap motion light above the porch and a camera aimed at the driveway. After a week, the camera footage showed a man pacing on the sidewalk at 2 in the morning, hands deep in pockets, lingering like someone reading the outline of our lives. We watched him light a cigarette and toss it, watched him pace again, and then watch him stop and listen, as if the house itself had a pulse he could feel. We moved out before the safe theft could be traced to anything more. Jason packed up the camera and the negatives he had left and left the rest. When he closed the door behind him, he looked at me and said, "You ever get the sense that there's a kind of person who watches your life like a show?" I did then. I still do. The last story is the one that left me with a deeper, colder edge to my instincts, the kind that makes you check the back seat of your car before getting in. I met Hannah on a rental listing site for a house that smelled of lemon cleaner and old paperbacks. She messaged me like a person who had rehearsed an answer to every possible question. Where do you work? What do you do on weekends? Are you certified with references? She had a job at a nearby co-op and a laugh that came through in texts like a warm hand. Her photos were candid, the kind a normal person would take, sunglasses at the beach, a dog asleep in her lap. I liked the way she moved in conversation. She made mundane details sound like plans. She moved in with her motorcycle helmet and a suitcase of clothes and the aluminum smell of gas. For the first month, she fit into the house like a piece of furniture, comfortable, unremarkable. She left notes in the kitchen about bills. She watered my succulents when I was out of town. She apologized for making coffee at 2 in the morning. Then small things started to tilt. I found receipts in a drawer that weren't mine, groceries with brands I didn't buy, a stranger's name on a dry cleaning tag. Once, my headphones were in the sink, coiled around a fork. I laughed and left a note saying, "Please don't eat my headphones." She wrote back an apology and a joke. It should have been normal roommate noise, but the pattern grew. One night, I came home late to find the front door ajar, a sliver of porch light carving the hallway into a bright line. I stood on the stoop and felt the air. The house smelled like citrus and the faint metallic tang of lipstick. My phone buzzing in my pocket sounded far away. Hannah was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching something on her laptop. She looked up as I closed the door behind me. "You're back late," she said, like a comment, not a question. In her lap was my travel mug. "I didn't know if you'd be back. I just took a sip, figured you'd want it warm." I found it hard to breathe. I said nothing about the mug. I let the adrenaline be the polite host that sorted the rest. The oddities continued, small, sterile invasions that felt like rituals. A jacket that wasn't mine was draped over my chair when I came home. My toothbrush was moved to the other side of the sink. My mail was opened, a letter I needed pried with care and then slid back into an envelope. She apologized each time with a softness that was almost maternal. "I was worried about your package. I thought you'd left it here." Each apology was another small erasure. I asked her, finally, "Do you ever borrow things?" Her laugh was quick and light. "All the time," she said. "I always plan to return them." The way she said it made me feel like I was standing on a diving board over water I hadn't tested. I started to lock my bedroom door, not because I thought she'd hurt me, but because privacy felt like a thing that could be chewed up by friendliness. Then came the night of the flashlight. I was staying late at the office and came back to find the house darker than usual. The living room lamp was on low, like someone had left it to go to another room. Hannah was in the kitchen, silhouetted by the sink light, humming. I walked in and set my bag down and went to my room to drop my keys. Inside, on my dresser, was a small flashlight that I never left out. I picked it up and felt a faint smear on the grip, a residue of pocket lint and something sweet. It was warm, as if it had only recently been held. I asked her where she got it. She blinked, like someone whose story had been interrupted. "I don't know," she said. "Have you been losing things?" She said it with that same soft tone, like feathers. I laughed because laughter is a way to map fear, humor along the edges. But when I looked later, the flashlight was gone. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of the front door opening and closing, soft as shoes being removed. I lay very still and listened. A slow breathing in the hallway, a small metallic clink. I crept out and found Hannah in the kitchen, opening the back door, flashlight in hand, flipping it on with a practiced motion. The beam swept the backyard and landed on the gravel and the neighbor's fence. She looked at me like someone caught mid-ritual and smiled apologetically. "I just wanted to check the shed," she said.
Guia de estilo e instruções para síntese de fala. Você é narrador, palestrante, com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era "I just wanted to check the shed", she said. Você está no meio de uma frase, pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. "I thought I left my bike lock there earlier." Her jacket was zipped up, and she had a small coil of rope under her arm. The rope felt wrong in the domestic light of a kitchen. The rope could be used for umbrellas, for hanging laundry, for nothing. I watched the beam skim a line across the fence and stop at a spot where the wood had been chewed by nails. "What are you doing?" I asked. It was the softest kind of confrontation. She put the flashlight down like the answer had been obvious. She said, "Looking for something. Sometimes things get hidden in plain sight." Her hands were steady. I told her I preferred she asked before going into the yard at night. She nodded. She said, "Of course." But she kept the rope by the sink for a week, then never used it. A month later, my keys were missing from the hook by the door. I tore the house apart, pockets, laundry bins, behind the couch cushions. Hannah acted like she didn't know when I asked. When I said, "Please just tell me if you've seen them," she touched my arm in a way that made me want to apologize for being upset. "I didn't," she said, "but I'll keep an eye out." A week passed and the keys didn't appear. I changed the locks. The locksmith was patient and professional and commented on how many people left spaces unlocked. Hannah was quiet that night, like someone whose smile had to be rehearsed. I found a small envelope in her trash later with a receipt from a hardware store for a box of screws and a small padlock. It didn't mean anything on its own, but the pattern was there, a stranger's logic of small transgressions. The final moment came when I found evidence that couldn't be rationalized as forgetfulness. I was making coffee when I noticed a black notebook tucked between my psychology textbooks. It wasn't mine. The cover was soft and worn, the pages inside filled with lists, addresses, dates, names, odd little sketches of doorways and window cracks. In one margin, a sentence was repeated twice, underlined. "He leaves the light at 3. On another page, a number that could have been a license plate. My stomach turned. I confronted her in the kitchen. She had been humming, but the sound tapered off, like someone who'd been told to stop. She reached for the book as if it weren't there, and then hesitated and put her hands flat on the counter. When I asked her where she got the notebook, she sighed and said, "I find things." The way she said it felt like a closing drawer. I asked if she'd been in my room. She admitted she had looked around a couple times when you weren't here, and said she thought you left a package. When I asked if she'd taken my keys, she said no, but said maybe I borrowed them to get something I thought you'd want. The words were a brush over a bruise. She couldn't give me the notebook. She couldn't explain the lists. I moved out 3 days later.